The rain was coming down so hard it felt like the sky itself was breaking apart. In the dim alley behind the hotel where she worked, Grace Turner stood trembling, clutching the crumpled medical bill that had just sealed her fate. Her younger brother's surgery had saved his life, but the debt that followed was drowning her faster than she could breathe. She had no family to rely on, no savings, nothing but a cleaning job that barely kept the lights on. And then came the offer, one so shocking, so impossible, that for a moment she thought it was a cruel joke. A billionaire CEO, Lucas Hartman, lay in a coma after a sudden accident. His powerful family needed someone, anyone, willing to legally marry him to secure an inheritance dispute. A desperate girl with crushing debt was the perfect pawn. Grace had only one choice: marry a man she had never met, who might never wake up, to save the only family she had left. If you believe kindness, sacrifice, and second chances still matter in this world, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Grace signed the papers with shaking hands at a small hospital office in Chicago, Illinois, unable to look at the unconscious man whose ring she now wore. Lucas lay still beneath white sheets, handsome yet frighteningly pale, with tubes and monitors surrounding him like an iron cage. His family barely acknowledged her, except for Lucas's cold, intimidating aunt, Marjorie Hartman, who eyed Grace with barely concealed disdain. To Marjorie, Grace was disposable, a temporary necessity, a contractual obligation. But Grace wasn't there for money, not really. She was there because she had no other way to keep her brother alive. And so she became Mrs. Grace Hartman in name only, her heart heavy and hopeful that someday she would be free. She worked double shifts at the hotel and spent her nights in the small spare room the Hartman family reluctantly gave her at the mansion. She cooked for herself, cleaned, quietly, and always stayed out of their way. They didn't want her to feel like family, and she didn't expect to. But there were days she found herself sitting in Lucas's private medical suite, reading to him softly, telling him stories of her childhood, or simply holding his hand during storms because she hated how cold and lonely his room felt. She didn't know why she did it, maybe because he too felt abandoned, left in a silent world where no one believed he would ever return. As weeks stretched into months, Grace's debt was slowly paid, but her life remained confined to the mansion's walls and the quiet, sterile hospital room. She grew used to the rhythm: work, hospital, sleep, repeat. But what she never expected was how human Lucas felt to her during those silent hours. She imagined what his voice might sound like, what his laugh might be like, whether he was kind or stern. Sometimes she even whispered apologies, telling him she never meant to take advantage of his condition, that she hoped someday he would understand she made the choice out of love for her brother, not greed. Marjorie, however, watched her with hawk-like sharpness. Every time Grace visited the hospital, every time she sat beside Lucas, Marjorie's scowl deepened. The Hartman aunt saw Grace's presence as an intrusion, an inconvenience, a stain on their spotless reputation. Grace learned to endure her cold remarks, her harsh warnings, her daily reminders that the marriage was temporary and meaningless. Grace only nodded and kept quiet, reminding herself that peace was better than confrontation. But fate had its own plans. One crisp morning, after nearly 7 months of coma, Grace entered Lucas's hospital room with a fresh cup of coffee and a new book to read. She almost dropped everything when she saw a nurse rushing out, calling for the physician. Lucas's fingers had moved. Grace's heart thundered. She stepped closer, tears already forming as she whispered, "Lucas, can you hear me?" Hours later, surrounded by doctors, Lucas slowly opened his eyes for the first time. The hospital erupted with noise. Calls, reports, urgent steps. Grace stood frozen in the corner, hugging herself, afraid to step closer, afraid to breathe. The doctors asked him dozens of questions, testing memory, coordination, recognition. He answered weakly but steadily, until finally Lucas looked around the room, confused. Then his voice, hoarse but clear, broke the world open. "Where's my wife?" Every head turned. The doctor hesitated. Marjorie stiffened. and Grace's knees nearly buckled. Marjorie immediately stepped forward, plastering on a tight smile, insisting Lucas was delusional and confused. She claimed he must be misremembering things. But Lucas shook his head, insisting again that he had a wife. He could feel it, he said, like a presence he had known even in the dark. The doctors exchanged looks. They told him his legal wife existed, but before they could explain further, Marjorie interrupted, demanding they keep irrelevant details from him for now. But Lucas didn't let it go. He kept asking, his voice growing stronger each time. Grace stayed hidden behind the doorway until Marjorie noticed her and intentionally blocked the entrance. Grace wasn't allowed to speak to him, she said. Not now, not ever again. The marriage had served its purpose, and now it was time to disappear. But Grace couldn't leave. Not when he had asked for her. Days passed as Lucas recovered. His memories before the accident were clear, but everything after the coma was blurry. He kept insisting he felt someone near him during the months he was unconscious. Someone gentle, someone who spoke softly, someone who sat with him through storms. The doctors said it was impossible for him to remember anything from a coma, but Lucas trusted what he felt. When the legal team finally explained the marriage contract, coldly, formally, without emotion, Lucas was stunned. The idea that he had been married to a woman he had never met, who had cared for him quietly in the shadows, shook him in ways he couldn't explain. He demanded to see her. Marjorie refused. Lucas insisted harder. Finally, after a heated confrontation that left Marjorie speechless, Lucas's lawyer arranged a meeting. Grace walked into the hospital room trembling, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes downcast. She had rehearsed leaving without causing trouble, without wanting anything, without expecting forgiveness or gratitude. She didn't want him to think she had stayed for money. She didn't want him to think she had taken advantage of him. She wanted only to return to her small, quiet life. But when Lucas saw her, something shifted inside him. He had never seen her face before, but her presence felt achingly familiar, like someone who had held his hand when the rest of the world forgot he existed. Grace tried to apologize for everything, for the forced marriage, for the months she stayed in his home, for being part of his family's schemes. She told him she would disappear now that he was awake and could annul everything. But Lucas surprised her. He told her she wasn't the one who had wronged him. She had saved him, even without knowing it. He told her he remembered the feeling of someone talking to him in the dark, reading to him, warming his hands. He believed that presence had helped him fight his way back, and he wanted to know her truth, her pain, her reasons, her heart. Grace broke down, confessing everything. Her brother's medical debt, her desperate choice, her loneliness, her months of reading to him and praying he would wake. She cried, thinking he would dismiss her, but instead, Lucas thanked her. Over the following weeks, as he healed, Lucas insisted Grace stay. Not as a contract wife, not as a burden, but as someone who had unknowingly become part of his recovery. He defended her from Marjorie's cruelty, slowly took back control of his company, and began rebuilding his life with humility and gratitude. And somewhere in the quiet moments they shared, walking through the garden, laughing over simple meals, sitting together at sunset, something real grew between them, something unforced, something healing. By the time Lucas fully recovered, the contract marriage no longer mattered. They both knew something deeper had begun, something fragile but real, something built not on obligation, but on a strange destiny that connected two people who were never supposed to meet. One evening, standing beneath the warm glow of the kitchen lights, Lucas looked at Grace with a softness she had never seen from anyone before. He told her he didn't want a contract wife or a legal formality. He wanted the woman who sat with him when everyone else walked away. He wanted the girl who chose sacrifice over pride. He wanted the gentle presence he had felt in the dark. And he asked her, not as a CEO, not as a patient, not as a man drowning in wealth and power, but as someone who had learned that love often grows in the most unexpected places. Grace, will you stay as my real wife? Her tears were the only answer he needed. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories to life. Before you leave, share in the comments, do you believe destiny can bring two strangers together?